This is a once in a lifetime, at least once in my lifetime, opportunity to do something for international tax cooperation. Not competition, but international tax cooperation at the global level.
Hello, this is the Weekly Tradecast, a podcast brought to you by UN Trade and Development. I'm Sarah Toms. We're exploring how major events are shaping trade and development and how that affects billions of people around the world. This week, we're looking at tax with special guest economist Lorraine Eden. Nobody likes to pay it, but collecting more tax is one way that countries can bring in billions of extra dollars each year to support economic and social development. One big challenge is the way that giant corporations are able to move profits around the world to places where they pay the lowest taxes. To ensure that multinationals pay their fair share, around 140 countries are working on global reforms to the tax architecture, including an agreed minimum rate of tax on big companies. Well, what are these reforms and how will they help developing countries? Joining me now for more about the implications is special guest Lorraine Eden, Professor Emerita of Management in the Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Lorraine is a prolific author and editor, including 10 books and more than 220 publications on international business, strategic management, the political economy, and global economics. The views in this interview are those of the guests. Lorraine, tell me, what are the tax changes that are being proposed and what difference would they make to us?
First of all, there's lots, and every country, of course, has the right to do its own tax changes. But I want to talk about two, and these are at the multilateral level. First is what's going on at the OECD. And second of all is to talk about what's going on at the United Nations with the proposed Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. So let me start with the OECD. The OECD is a group of upper and middle income countries. And the OECD since the Second World War, has been involved in setting up an international tax architecture. Any disputes are usually handled through something called bilateral tax treaties. And these were disputes avoiding double taxation of multinationals. But the problem is, with that being its primary focus, there were lots of opportunities left for multinationals to take advantage of loopholes. Now, what I mean by loopholes is if the tax rate in one country is 20% and the tax rate in another country is 30%, multinationals could actually shift their profits into the 20% country and basically save 10 points of tax, right? And a whole network of these opportunities, together with the sophisticated tax planning advisors, provided lots of opportunities, especially for the very large multinationals, to reduce their tax rates. The financial crisis in 2008, 2009, I think, was the real tipping point. The new question became, how do you get them taxed at all? And out of that came what we call the BEPS 1 and BEPS 2 process. And there was a first round of BEPS negotiations among the OECD member countries that focused on fixing the loopholes. And that was the BEPS 1 process. It resulted in a multilateral tax convention that countries could sign on to, with a whole long list of items they could choose to sign on to or not. And slowly, though we've been 9 years at this now, countries have been slowly signing on to these item issues. Having said that, the amount of tax avoidance has continued to rise. And the latest estimates I saw was something like $600 billion were underpaid last year by multinationals. Now, there were 15 action items in 2015, and the top one on the list was the digital economy. And we all know about that. And the question is, how do you tax these very large multinationals that are engaged in these digital activities? And that prompted BEPS round 2, was let's figure out how we tax digital activities. What emerged out of that process were a series of policies that really don't have much to do with digital at all. So, Pillar One, most developing countries believe they were left out of the process and they aren't going to benefit very much from it. And I think they're right. Pillar Two is very different. And again, that's got nothing to do with digital at all. Basically, it's going to set a minimum corporate income tax rate of 15% using financial data, not tax data, but financial data. So at the end of the day, none of these proposals really deal with taxing digital multinationals and digital transactions, and they really aren't expected to raise a lot of money for the global South. And I think that's what happened, and the reason why the African group of countries and the Latin American group of countries started working together to say we need to shift this to the UN. By moving it to the United Nations, you bring all countries into the discussions. Each country has one vote. It may be longer and take more time to do this, but the idea is to see if there can be something done at the UN. And that's the second of these major tax changes. We have had an ad hoc committee set up that started work in January 2024, has now developed ad hoc terms of reference that have gone to the UN General Assembly. I'm firmly expecting these to move into play. And the proposal there is to create a framework convention. They set up a series of overall arching principles and norms about how things are going to be done. The first one will be in cross-border services, which are very important for developing countries, for the global South, because they're importers of major cross-border services. Because we live in a service economy now, not a manufacturing economy. I can tell you that some of the others that are being discussed, one is on illicit financial flows. That, of course, is a huge issue for the global South. Another possibility is to do something on the digital economy. There's proposals for a global wealth tax, and then there's a variety of others.
How can we ensure that anything will actually happen?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. If you think about it, both of these processes are happening at the multilateral level. They need countries to sign on. And some countries, of course, have much more weight than others. So what China, India, and the United States do is going to be very important in terms of this. The U.S. is changing governments, and it's not clear what the policies in international tax or even the policies towards the OECD or the United Nations will be from the United States. I think it's hard to know. In the UN process, there'll be at least 3 years where the vote is very clearly in favor of moving on. The Secretary General is very positive towards this. The vast bulk of countries have voted for it, and each country has one vote. And so the process at the UN for the Framework Convention is happening. My own view on this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to create a multilateral convention that is focused on international tax cooperation at the global level. My worry has been that what we've seen is a lot of international tax competition among countries, and that has created a race to the bottom in tax rates. Small countries that don't have a lot of resources, how do they attract inward foreign direct investment? They set really low tax rates to try and act as conduits to bring some money in. Some of them may encourage illicit financial flows. It's difficult for countries that do not have a lot of resources or highly educated population, don't have good infrastructure to attract inward foreign direct investment. And multinationals are rational actors. They took advantage of all of these differences and exploited the gaps and reduced their tax rates. Some of the world's biggest multinationals, the overall corporate income tax rate they pay is like 4% of profits. And you and I pay significantly more than that on our income.
What can be done for developing countries then? How can they turn these reforms into actual revenues and make an impact on the ground?
Well, I think they have to get together in clubs. Actually, I think the Africa group is doing exactly what it should be doing, is working as a group with a common voice. By getting together and developing a common policy, I think is clearly having a huge impact at the UN level. The Latin American, the LATAM group doing the same. They need to build tax capacity. They have to do something about the underground and illicit economies that basically don't pay tax in their own country. So some of this is domestic revenue mobilization requires strong institutions at home in order to encourage people to pay tax. If we could get a multilateral framework convention at the UN that was focused on international tax cooperation, not competition, that would provide more opportunities for income to flow to the global south, I think. The small, developed, open economies could also be a very helpful club in working towards international tax cooperation rather than the competition that we've had for the last many years.
Lorraine, in your opinion, do you think the reforms go far enough, or are big multinationals just being let off lightly?
No, I don't think the reforms go far enough at all. Matter of fact, I think they've kind of missed the boat. And they particularly need to focus on, country by country reporting, exchange of information, beneficial ownership provisions becoming public information, so we know who owns whom, which we don't know now. So I think the first BEPS round is not finished. The second thing is the digital economy. And as I've said, none of these proposals have anything to do with the digital economy. Some of the largest digital firms in the world are banks and financial institutions, and they're not even in it. They were taken out. The natural resource industries, multinationals, were taken out. We need to plug the loopholes. The amount of money that is being drained off continues to be large. Let me say, I'm not in favor of tariffs, but I am saying somehow we need to work out a way that countries have a right to tax digital goods, digital services, digital investments, digital intangibles, digital assets in a way that raises revenue. And let me just add one more point about that, Sarah. These taxes are easy to put on. One of the things about why tariffs, I think, have been around for such a long time is they're easy to do. It does cause consumer prices to go up, and it also causes firm profits to fall. But because they're easy, countries have found, particularly countries that don't have much tax capacity, that it's a way to raise revenue. And so that's why you see sales taxes and value-added taxes around the world. So as I said, this is a once in a lifetime, at least once in my lifetime, opportunity to do something for international tax cooperation, not competition, but international tax cooperation at the global level. Will it happen? It's hard to know. I think it'll only happen if there is a reach across the aisle between the North and the South for clubs of rich countries to say, together we need to make sure that we leave no one behind. And we'll see. I don't think you get anything done unless you can create win-wins. You don't want to race to the bottom like we've had. Bilateral tax treaties that facilitate this kind of profit avoidance and base shifting, we need to do something about that. And I applaud the Africa group and the LATAM group for taking the lead on this. My hope is that many of the small, rich countries, like the Irish, the Brits, the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Australians and New Zealanders, will recognize that we all benefit if we leave no one behind.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was Lorraine Eden from Texas A&M University, who was this week's guest. Tune into the Weekly Tradecast next week and every week for more insights on the most pressing issues around the world of trade and development. And there's even more on our website, unctad.org. I'm Sarah Toms in Geneva. Goodbye for now.